It's a miserable wet day here in the Lake District, and whilst I could put on my waterproofs, venture outside and get some really moody landscape shots or even some really atmospheric street scenes, actually I prefer to stay inside where it's warm and comfortable. So I thought what I would do today is show you a great indoor rainy day project that will really help you with your composition, and we're going to talk about the rule of odds. Now, not everything in life comes as a group of odd numbers. Sometimes you'll be faced with the opposite situation, and I'm going to show you a wonderful tip that will really help improve your photography when you're faced with groups of even numbers, and I'll show you how to split them up in a way that will really improve your composition. So let's get started. Welcome to Nifty 50 Photographers. I'm Richard Gill. I'm a professional photographer, and on this channel I provide free photography training for those of us who are a little bit older. I cover things like how to get the best out of your camera, composition, editing, and those sort of things. If that sounds like it's of interest to you, then please make sure you subscribe to the channel. So let's get started with the rule of odds. Our brains are wired to sort scenes out into even groups, into even numbers, and try and compare those competing groups. Now visually this can be quite distracting and in a way sort of stressful as we try and switch looking from one group to another and comparing the two. So why the rule of odds works is that now our eyes are allowed to rove round the scene, and it brings a sense of harmony to us. It's much calmer, and that's what makes your photos more appealing. It works particularly well with groups of 3 and 5. Once you get above 7, it all gets a bit too noisy for our brains, and the brain tends to switch off in those larger groups. That said, you don't have to worry about counting them. Just concentrate on splitting things down into smaller groups, and I'll show you a great trick with portrait photos when you're trying to photograph a group of people. So if you fancy creating some nice still lifes indoor, you've got a rainy day and nothing better to do, then this is my setup. So what I've done, actually, I've got my camera set so it's looking straight down onto a black table. Now this is a little camping table. If you haven't got one of those, you can simply use any table and choose a background that will contrast with your subject, and you can do that just using some coloured card or some coloured paper. Now I've got my tripod set up in a way I take out the centre column and I can turn it the other way up so I can make my camera look straight down. If you can't do that, you can of course arrange it with your camera looking at 45 degrees. You'll get a slightly different shot, but it'll still make some nice creative photos. And if you're doing it in that format, then think about building something with some height. I'll show you an example in a moment or two when I try it that other way around. But first we'll do a few looking straight down. So I've set up a scene here with 4 items in it, and you can immediately see our eyes struggling to settle on it, and it's trying to split it into 2 pairs, and you're sort of roving around, and it's not really an attractive scene. If I just take one of these oranges away, then immediately and arrange them perhaps slightly more into a cluster, it becomes a little bit more visually appealing. So you can see straight away what the effect of arranging things into 3 actually does. I'll show you another example. Here I've just arranged 4 forks out into a little fan, and already our brain is trying to split these into 2 separate little pairs. But if I introduce now a 5th one, now what we try to do with our eyes is more sort of follow the pattern of the forks round, and that creates a more interesting and appealing photo. So you get the idea of how 3s and 5s work very well. If I took 2 of these away and we just had the 3, that would also work. However, just 2, not as interesting. So let's try and take a creative still life now. So I'm going to try something with my 5 forks. And it's really, I would recommend you have your camera in a live view mode so that you can see actually what is going on. It's quite a challenge to try and get your head into the viewfinder when you've got this kind of a setup. And if I arrange them in sort of 2 rows, I've got a row of 3 and a row of 2 there, but we've still got all 5, and I think that looks quite an interesting shot, so I would give it a try. Now what I'm going to do is, let me show you the back of the camera. Right, if you see the back of my camera, what I'm going to do now is actually underexpose this quite a bit. You can see on the histogram I've got that way over to the left, and the reason for that is I want the table to look really black. The forks are nice and shiny and silver, so they should show up fine in the photo, but because the table's not perfectly black, it's got a few little different coloured marks on it. By underexposing it, it's very easy to make that appear completely black. So I'm going to take that shot. I've got it on a 2-second timer. If you don't know how to set that, then take a look at my playlists on getting to know your camera. And there's our final shot. So I'll have a play with a couple of other ideas. Now I did say to you, I'd tell you how we cope with even numbers, and I've arranged 4 forks here, and we're going to have a look at how to deal with that. And the simplest way actually is just to divide them up into different groups, so a 3 and a 1 would work. If I just move this 1 over to the side and perhaps cluster the 3 together, then immediately you can see we've created something slightly different, and it's made it more interesting because our eye is not trying to make 2 pairs out of the 4 forks. It's got 2 quite separate things to look at, and it's a bit more visually calming. I'll take a shot of that and then you can see the finished example too. Let's try some other examples and see what we can get. I'm just going to introduce another element here now. Sometimes, as we were talking about patterns and symmetry in the other video, and if you haven't seen that, I will put a link in, but sometimes that can be quite disruptive. I'm going to make sure that's completely in focus now, and I want that, I've got a tomato. This is if any of you use the Pomodoro technique, it's actually a kitchen timer, and the guy who invented it used a timer very similar to this. So let's take that shot too. And let me try something else. So I'm actually going to use 4 items in the next shot. So I'm going to use my 3 oranges and 1 apple, and I'm going to arrange those in a little cluster like that, and put the apple off to one side to see if that makes anything more interesting. Need to change the exposure on that because it's a bit overexposed. It's probably because the lighting outside has changed. One other thing I should explain to you about my setup is, so what I've done is I've got a table by the window, and this is actually an east-facing window. This is a great way to do it, and very easy to do in your own home. So just find a window that either faces north or east. What you want to avoid is a window with direct sunlight blasting through it, because for one, actually as the sun moves, your lighting is going to change quite dramatically, but secondly it's going to be very harsh, where this is nice and soft and it's perfect for still life photography. And there's another shot of the apples and orange. Obi! Enough! I did say that I would talk to you, how can you do this with portraits and people, especially if you've got groups. Now, unfortunately I can't get a group of people in my living room, but I have got some of my old friends that you've seen in other videos, Scooby-Doo and his mates, so we'll get that set up and show you how it works. I wanted to show you how you would deal with a situation where you've got things in pairs and how to make it more interesting. Now, a classic example of that might be a family portrait, and I've set up a little scene here. I've got, if you can imagine, Scooby-Doo and the teddy bear as the parents, and then the two children here, and I put them right and left of the parents. And that would be classically how a lot of portrait photographers or amateur photographers would think about arranging that scene. Now, the problem with it is everything is split into pairs. So what we want to do is try and make this more interesting. So how will we do that? And let's arrange them into a slightly different group. Let's try it with a 3 and a 1, and let's see how that looks. So what I've done now is I've arranged this cluster of 3 here. So let's say mum, dad and child 1 as one little group, and then I've separated one of the children, put them off to one side, but I've got them sort of gazing lovingly, if you can imagine, into mum or dad's eyes. So you've still got that connection with the main group, so you've still got that family scene, and the two parts are still connected, but your eye finds that visually much more interesting because it's not trying to split the scene into 2 pairs. Now it can rove around the scene, and you've got a bit more narrative in there as well as a lot more harmony. So that's how you would create things with group photos. If you've got more people, you can break them down into more groups, maybe a group of 3 or a group of 5 even. If you have a crowd of people, like you can see in this shot I've taken of an architectural practice. Now, I could have easily done the classic lineup and put the tallest people in the middle and tapered the photo down, so forming a sort of pyramid shape with the tallest people in the middle and tapering down to the shorter ones at the outside edge. But instead what I've done here is I've split them into small groups, albeit it looks a bit subtle, but by mixing and matching people of different height, we've created sort of 3 groups. And that allows our eye to focus in on each group and look at the people rather than try and scan along the line and work out what's going on. And that makes the photo more interesting. I've still kept them as one cohesive group, so it's clear that they all belong to the same business. And you can do that in your portrait shot. So if you're photographing something like a wedding, think about breaking down the groups of people into little clusters of 3s and 5s, or having 3 separate groups and so on. I hope you've enjoyed that video and it's given you an insight into how to use the rule of odds, how to split things up into 3s and 5s to create something with more visual harmony. If you did, please do give it a thumbs up and hit that like button. And why not subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so? I'd love to see some of your photos too, so why not share them in the Nifty 50 Photographers Facebook group. There's a link in the description. Now, what you should do next, above all, is practice, but also take a look at some of my other composition videos that appear in this playlist. And I'll look forward to seeing you next time.